Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arkansas. Welcome to the show. My name is Chris James. Tonight on Strange Things, we'll be discussing coffee. This is Season 1, Episode 13. Now, I know a lot of people will think, ooh, number 13, that's unlucky. Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics Company, not only did she open her doors Friday the 13th, her office building was 13 stories tall, and her office was on the 13th floor. So, for some people, the number 13 is not a bad thing. Despite what some people might think out there, Starbucks did not invent coffee. According to legend, ancestors of today's Oromo people in a region of Kaffa in Ethiopia were believed to have been the first to recognize the energizing effects of the coffee plant. The coffee bean would be wrapped in animal fat and used kind of like a modern-day energy bar, but probably not nearly as tasty. Several hours in the hot sun, I'm sure that animal fat took on a somewhat different taste. It came in handy during long walks out in hunting parties. Today there's no evidence indicating where in Africa coffee grew or who might have used it as a stimulant or even known about it. It's mostly just legend today. The story of the 9th century Ethiopian goatherd who is supposed to have discovered coffee when he noticed his excited goats after eating the beans. The trouble with the story is it wasn't written down until 1671, and it's more than likely made-up tale to lay claim to the discovery of coffee. It's probably similar to the King Arthur stories. Happened a long time ago, and nobody bothered to write it down until more recently. Because of this story, though, everyone in Ethiopia drinks coffee every day as a prestigious ritual. They drink coffee almost as a ceremony. They gather at someone's house, they make a strong pot of coffee and something you wouldn't recognize today here in the United States. The eldest is always served first, and it goes around the room based on how high in the family unit you are, or if you're a visiting member, you're served after the oldest man in the room. Other accounts attribute the discovery of coffee to Sheikh Omar, who was exiled from Yemen. Don't know why he got thrown out of the country, but they sent him out into the desert to live. It's said that Omar tried chewing some red berries he found on a tree. He found them to be somewhat bitter, so he's supposed to have tried roasting them. After roasting them, he discovered they were just too hard to eat. So what did he do? He's supposed to have crushed them with a rock. Once he'd crushed them, he's got this fine powdery mess in his hand, and so he put it in water, and the rest is supposed to be history. The concoction, he found, was stimulating and helped him think straight. After consuming a large quantity of coffee, he made his way back to Yemen, where he introduced coffee as a miracle drug. The people that drank it thought that it was something from the gods. So therefore, suddenly coffee caught on quite well in Yemen, and Sheikh Omar was welcomed back. Sheikh Abd al-Qadir said that coffee is a common man's gold, and like gold, it brings to every person the feeling of luxury and nobility. The name coffee might have come from the Kaffa region, but some say it came from the Yemenis word kawa, which means wine. Since wine is illegal in that part of the world, The coffee was their substitute. Still others say the word coffee was an old word that meant to put off your desires for something, your desire for sleep. Coffee was originally regarded as a wonder drug in Yemen and Arabia and was taken only at the advice of a doctor. Many saw coffee as a brain tonic or as a way to stimulate religious visions. The city of Mocha was the first port to spread coffee beans to other parts of the world. It's said that the Yemenis bean had a chocolatey quality to them, a characteristic that now leads chocolatey drinks to be labeled mocha. By 1475, Kivahan, the world's first coffee house, is opened in, of all places, Constantinople, which at that time was a Christian city. It was the home of the other pope. At that time there were two popes, one in Italy and one in Constantinople. He was the head of the Holy Roman Empire. Unusual place for the first coffee house to be created. In the Middle East, if you wanted coffee, you went to a street vendor instead. By 1511, the governor of Mecca, Kar Beg, tried to ban coffee because he thought that coffee might encourage the emergence of an opposition to his government. Beg wasn't as smart as he thought because the Sultan of Arabia considered coffee to be sacred and promptly had the governor put to death. Don't mess with that man's coffee. In Arabia, coffee plants were guarded like we guard nuclear power plants today. The idea was to keep coffee in Arabia. That worked better in concept than in practice. Just as with any other delicacy, when you tell people they can't have it, they find a way to get their hands on it, and they cut you out of the system. In the late 1500s, the first small quantities of coffee began to trickle into Italy, probably sent home from visitors to the Middle East. It was very much a drink of the very rich. Pope Vincent III was told that coffee was the devil's drink. He decided to try a small taste, make sure that before he banned something it was really as bad as everyone said it was. The Pope stated the drink was so delicious it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it. Vicente III duly baptized coffee, making it an acceptable drink for the Christian flock. In the 1600s, Sultan Murad IV made drinking coffee a capital crime. He went so far as to dress like a commoner, sneak about town late at night, sniffing around the doors of people's houses, trying to discern who was doing the wrong thing by making coffee. If you were caught making coffee, your head was chopped off. That put an abrupt end to any coffee consumption. Well, why would he do that? Well, he stepped into a few bars and observed the crowds drinking and singing. But when he stopped by a local coffee house, he observed people sitting around talking. He assumed they were plotting to overthrow the government. Does that sound a little bit familiar? The same reason the last guy tried banning coffee. We're going to take a brief pause here to play some commercials. We will be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Eaterby Day, Suite number 7. If coffee doesn't attract your interest, they also have tea, hot chocolate, and other delicacies. For the best coffee in town, stop on by 1002 Eaterby Day, Suite number 7. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanelza Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanelza Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. And welcome back to Strange Things. We're discussing coffee and how strange a drink it can possibly be. By 1616, the Dutch had managed to steal coffee trees and taken them to greenhouses in Holland. Around the same time, Baba Budan smuggled fertile seeds to Mysore in India. To this day, the offshoots of those original plants are still farmed in Mysore. The Dutch, who had smuggled the coffee plants out of Arabia, took them to Ceylon and Java. That's where they were planted, harvested, and soon the Dutch were growing coffee like mad. To this day, if you go to a coffee house and order a cup of Java, that is why. Didn't take long for the Dutch to soon have a monopoly of their own. 1650, a Lebanese man by the name of Jacobs opened the first coffee house in Oxford University, England. We don't think coffee and England. They just don't go together. You think of England, you think tea. However, England was very much of a coffee-drinking country. By 1674, the women of England started a petition against coffee. They said it was rifling nature of her choice treasures and drying up radical moisture. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit. The Battle of Vienna. The Turks were constantly invading Europe. Earlier, we had discussed a man named Vlad Tepes who had done his best to keep the Turks out of Europe. Well, with his passing, the Turks were constantly getting closer and closer into Europe. They had laid siege to Vienna on numerous occasions, trying to take the city, because if they could take Vienna, they pretty much were guaranteed they could take the rest of Europe. Now, the Battle of Vienna took place on, of all dates, September 11th, 1683. It wasn't until St. John, the King of Poland, who came to the aid of Vienna, that the Turks were driven out of the area. There's often recited story that after the Battle of Vienna, the Viennese discovered many large sacks that had been abandoned by the Ottoman encampment. The story goes that once they opened these bags, they were small, brown, looked like beans, and that's what the Viennese thought they were. But upon trying to sample these beans, they discovered they didn't taste very good. It wasn't until a royalty who had been to the Middle East and who had tasted coffee before convinced them what they needed to do. They needed to roast the beans, then they needed to crush the beans, then they needed to boil water, pour the boiling water over the crushed beans, and then consume at your leisure. The story also goes that the first coffee house in Vienna was established by Armenian Johannes Theodat in 1685, which would have been just shortly after the Battle of Vienna. By 1688, London was the stage for the opening of one of the most important coffee houses in all of Europe, the Lloyd's Coffee House. This became a meeting place for ship captains, shippers, owners of vessels, and people interested in importing and exporting any goods. It didn't take long for the people sitting around this Lloyd's coffee house making plans and changing the course of income that Lloyd's became known as Lloyd's of London, the insurance company. At this coffee house were people that they referred to as underwriters. Now, what the heck could an underwriter be? Say you had a ship, and you're going to sail to India, you're going to pick up a load of spice and bring it back to England. Now, there's a good chance that you might not make it. That is, your ship might sink. And so what you would do as you're making plans to leave for India is you would write your name and the name of your ship on a chalkboard. And then someone would come along and they would write their name under your name, thus the term underwriter. What they were saying is if your ship sunk, they would help you buy a new ship. But on the other hand, if your ship successfully made it back to London, you had to cut them in on the profit. That's where you get insurance underwriters today. It all started out with a chalkboard in a coffee house. Now, women were not allowed in coffee houses at this time. This was dedicated to men's business. The coffee house was so conducive for business that, as we all know, Lloyd's became the largest insurance company in the world. Up until the 1700s, you didn't dare drink water, so people had been drinking beer. That wasn't beer like you got today, where you take it out of the refrigerator and open a can or a bottle. Back then, beer was just about any kind of a liquid that came in a big barrel, and you drink the stuff warm, and it didn't have nearly the alcohol content that it does today. But at the same time, all of Europe was consuming nothing but beer for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Why beer? Well, part of the process of making beer is you have to boil the water. How do you make coffee? Once again, you have to boil the water. So suddenly people were replacing beer, which kind of hard to get anything done if you drink too much of that stuff. They started replacing it with coffee. You drink a lot of coffee, you can get all kinds of things done. Flash Rosenberg said, "I believe humans get a lot done, not because we're smart, but because we have thumbs so that we can make coffee." In 1723, a French naval officer, Gabriel Mathieu de Clew, stole a plant and shipped it to Martinique. 50 years later, there are over 19 million coffee trees on the island. And over time, 90% of the world's commercial coffee crop would come from that one single plant. Paris coffee houses quickly became the symbol of liberal ideas, thinking instead of drowning your sorrows, and the spread of culture. It is not by accident that the coffee was elected the official beverage of the Age of Enlightenment. The cultural movement developed between 1688 and 1789 and was based on the idea that reason is essential for verifying and deepening one's knowledge. Coffee houses gave the protagonists of the cultural renewal the chance to meet and exchange views. You go into a bar, people drink beer, they yell and scream at each other, somebody starts a fight, somebody winds up in jail or getting thrown out the door. You go to a coffee house, on the other hand, people sit around and they talk about their ideas. They come up with some strange ideas, but the whole point is they're sharing their ideas back and forth, and nobody gets punched in the nose. And since ladies were not allowed in coffee houses at this time, it became a meeting place for women of negotiable affections to ply their trade. Wives became convinced that coffee was more of a sedative than a stimulant, since their husbands would come home too tired to do much but sleep. In 1746, the Swedish government made it illegal to even have coffee paraphernalia, including cups and dishes. The cops began confiscating cups and dishes because King Gustavus III was convinced that it was a health issue. He ordered prisoners to have to drink coffee while the doctors sat there and monitored their health. Now, what could be more of a punishment than you can possibly imagine than to have to sit there and watch some prisoner consuming coffee all day? And I'm sure the prisoners were more than happy to have this sentence, since prison food is notorious for being bad, so a little bit of coffee probably made it taste much better. In 1760, the Industrial Revolution took place, probably simply because of the consumption of coffee over beer. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "I'd rather suffer with coffee than to be senseless." In 1773, Americans threw coffee and tea overboard to protest English taxes on the nation, bringing about the Boston Tea Party and spurring a revolution. So why is it called the Boston Tea Party instead of the Boston Coffee Party? Tea Party, I guess, sounded much better. And Americans suddenly began drinking coffee as a patriotic move. If you went into a restaurant or an inn and asked for a cup of tea, they might throw you out the door. If, on the other hand, you walked in and asked for a cup of coffee, they'd be more than happy to serve you. So suddenly coffee became the patriotic thing to do. In 1781, Frederick the Great banned coffee in Germany and Prussia because he was convinced people were spending too much money on the drink. At that time, it was a rich man's drink, and Frederick wanted his people to drink more beer, which was cheaper at that time. It's also a lot easier to control a crowd of people when they're slightly sedated than when their brain has been charged up with caffeine. Not much happened in the way of coffee during the 1800s. Just a slow time in history for that particular beverage. 1860, 1 in 10 Army rifles came equipped with a coffee grinder mounted in the stock. That's how important coffee had become. So if you've had a busy day running around shooting at people and it's time to take a break, you take your rifle, open up the side of the stock, you dump your coffee beans in there, mount a little handle, crank out your coffee, make a cup of coffee to enjoy the day, and hope nobody shoots at you while you're drinking it. 1885, a process of using natural gas and hot air became the most popular method of roasting the coffee beans. 1886, former wholesale grocer Joel Cheek names his popular coffee blend the Maxwell House after the hotel in New York City, after the hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, where it was being served. And that's about it for the 1800s. 1900, Hills Brothers began using vacuum-packed cans to ship coffee. It would stay fresh for months instead of weeks. So the Hills Brothers company actually developed and began using the vacuum canister to ship their coffee in. Espresso was invented in Italy at the beginning of the 20th century by Luigi Pezzera of Milan, who invented a method of making coffee with steam pressure. This method provided a quick way of making a single cup of coffee expressly for one person. The original Italian may have meant pressed coffee, but the meaning also had the connotation of speed. At that time, if your workers wanted to take a break and drink some coffee, it would take minutes for each person to make their cup of coffee and then consume it. With the espresso machine, everybody could have their cup in hand within about a few minutes. So it sped up the break time. 1905, the Pravoni Company began manufacturing machines based on the Bezzera patent. 1927, the first espresso machine was brought to America. This La Provini machine is still on display at the place where it was first installed, Cafe Reggio in New York, with the title of Home of the Original Cappuccino, although I believe cappuccino was invented in Italy, but who's to say? Although this method increased the speed dramatically from the brewing time of 4 minutes per cup to about 20 seconds, hence the name espresso, the coffee tasted bitter because the steam was too hot. One of the first companies to offer official breather during workday was Buffalo, New York's Barcolo Manufacturing Company, which initiated the regulated recess in 1902. Today, the company is known as Barcalounger, the reclining chair company. Not only do their chairs take it easy, their workers do as well. Coffee trees arrived in Hawaii in the early 1800s. The trees were planted in Oahu and then spread to other islands. The first actual coffee plantation was on the north shore of Kauai. In the 20th century, the future of coffee on Hawaii was uncertain because sugar tariffs were lifted to the mainland in the 1900s, and quickly coffee plantations were replaced by sugarcane fields. But in the 60s and 70s, coffee once again became a delicacy and people were willing to pay more for unique coffee. As a result, the coffee plantations saw their second wind after 100 years. The life of coffee in Hawaii had come full circle. There are now upwards of 7,000 acres producing about 7 million pounds of green coffee each year. Hawaiian Island coffee is still one of the most expensive, relatively high-volume coffees consumed in the world, along with the likes of Jamaican Blue Mountain Coffee. Ways to know you drink too much coffee. You answer the door before people knock. Juan Valdez named his donkey after you. Some of you will recognize the name Juan Valdez. The only kitchen appliance you own are made by Mr. Coffee. You get a tax cut for all the coffee you bought. You get a speeding ticket even when you're parked. You speed walk in your sleep. And your first aid kit contains 2 pints of coffee with an IV hookup. That's how you know if you drink a lot of coffee, like I do. We have 6 coffee makers at our house. 5 of them are plugged in right now. 1 is in storage. Not that we drink a lot of coffee, but we drink a lot of coffee. We're going to take a break here, play some commercials, let you hear somebody else talk for a minute. We'll be right back after these exciting messages. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. With all this talk of coffee, I'm sure everybody out there is just wishing they had a good hot cup of coffee to drink. So swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. If you've never tried coffee, why wait any longer? Stop on by, get you a big old steaming hot cup of coffee, or if you prefer a cup of tea or hot chocolate. They also have pastries and other delicacies. Nice atmosphere. If you want to sit down and talk to somebody and not listen to a bunch of teenagers on the internet, stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. And yes, there is plenty of parking at this location. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanelza Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanelza Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back to the show. The Secretary of the Navy, Joseph Daniels, decided to ban alcohol from United States Navy ships in General Order Number 99, June 1st, 1914. As a means of showing their displeasure, sailors began referring to coffee as Joe. So now you can order a cup of Joe at just about any coffee shop and they'll know what it is you're talking about. Old coffee in a cup signifies seniority and status in the military, especially in the Navy, particularly on deployment. As one blogger noted, you may not be able to embrace your loved ones while you are gone, but at least you can still taste the same coffee you drank the day you left. Dean Lutz, machinery repairman first class, now retired, told me this story about an occurrence that happened over a coffee cup. A Master Chief friend of mine had a cup he'd used for years. It was once white, but because it had been used and only rinsed for so long, it was now brown. One day a new guy, it's always the new guys that do things like this, the new guy decided to wash this cup. He made it sparkling white once again. When the Master Chief came down to the space to check on things, he looked for his cup. Not seeing his brown cup, he asked, "Where the hell is his coffee cup?" The new guy grabbed the sparkling white cup and presented it to the Master Chief. "Here you are, I washed it for you." The Master Chief snatched it out of his hand and smashed it on the deck, muttering, "You little so-and-so, never touch my cup," as he chased him around the space. Better taste with fresh coffee in a well-seasoned cup than a brand new cup. In the Army, we used an aluminum coffee cup that came wrapped around your canteen. It had a bizarre shape to it, and the handles folded, and they squeaked and rattled if you weren't careful with them, so you always had to make sure that the cup was well secured before you went anywhere. The bottom was always scorched from being set over any source of heat available to try to make coffee. You always tried to have at least a few packages of instant coffee on you somewhere, so if you did have opportunity to take a break, you could fire up the old coffee and drink to your heart's content. And coffee in the military does have more caffeine than civilian coffee. The rear grill of an M1 tank is a very good stove. Just don't leave your cup there too long. It will melt. In the military, one time several years ago, we were out at Fort Irwin, the National Training Center, and instead of riding around the tanks like I was supposed to, I got stuck pulling guard duty every night for the entire trip. Of all things, there I am guarding what we call the TOC, Tactical Operations Center. And it was guard duty about 20 hours a day. You got 4 hours to take care of other business like KP and things. But it was a whole lot of guard duty. Inside the TOC, the officers always had a great big silver bullet full of coffee. This thing must have held about 10 gallons. And it was always there just inside the flap, well out of my reach. At least that's what I thought at first. Then one night on guard duty, as I'm marching around the perimeter of the TOC, I noticed that any time an officer came and went, and he'd open that flap, I could see that shiny silver bullet sitting there full of hot black coffee. It was calling my name. And since the inside of the TOC was only lit by red lights so that the officers could maintain their night vision, it was no big deal for me to open that flap and shove my canteen cup under the nozzle of that silver bullet and drain off a cup or two, or 3, or 4. I believe in one night I probably drank that entire 10-gallon pot of coffee just by myself. It kept me awake. Gave me plenty of time to think odd thoughts as I marched around in a great big circle out in the desert. I wonder if the officers to this day are wondering what happened to all that coffee that just seemed to vanish on its own. I'm sure at least one or two of them knew what was up, but the vast majority of them hadn't a clue. Anyway, getting back to coffee. Clark Gable said, "I never laugh until I've had my coffee." Jackie Chan said, "Coffee is a language in itself." How do you make your coffee? Do you percolate it? Do you drip it? Or do you press it? Well, to begin with, if you percolate your coffee, what you're doing is you're boiling the coffee after it's already made. This can lead to a very bitter tasting coffee because you're constantly reheating the coffee that has already been made, and that's what the percolation does. True, this was the old form of making coffee around the house back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It could also have been the reason a lot of people got heartburn from drinking coffee. It also had a lot of oil left over because there was nothing to keep the oil out of the coffee. It was strong, it was black, it kept you awake. It just wasn't that good of a taste. Now, drip coffee, on the other hand, you heat the water, and then the water runs through the coffee grounds. The coffee is accumulated at the bottom inside the carafe, but it's not boiled after it's made. Also, the basket works as a filter, taking out some of that oil that gives it that bitter taste. Therefore, you get a much better tasting cup of coffee if you use a drip grind. Then the press. The press is great and wonderful and all if you've got the time to mess around with it. And you can only make a few cups at a time. But you take your coffee grounds, you put them into the pot, you pour the hot water into the pot, you press the grinds down to the bottom of the press, and then you consume what's left on the top. Lots of moving parts. Great coffee if you've got the time to make it that way. How do you know if you drink too much coffee? You can take a picture of yourself from 10 feet away without using the timer. You lick the coffee pot clean. You spend every vacation visiting the Maxwell House. You're the employee of the month at the local coffee house and you don't even work there. You've worn out your third pair of tennis shoes this week. Your eyes stay open when you sneeze. And your coffee cake must have coffee in it. It was 1952 that the Midday Coffee Time got its official title. In that year, the Pan American Coffee Bureau, a corporate interest group designed to encourage Americans to drink coffee from our southern neighbors, places like Colombia and Brazil, launched an advertising campaign urging folks to give yourself a coffee break and get what coffee has to give to you. The coffee trees can live up to 200 years. And some people will be surprised to note that coffee is actually a fruit. Coffee beans, as we know them, are actually the pits of a cherry-like berry that are grown on trees. Even though the coffee is actually a seed, it's called a bean because of its resemblance to a bean. Coffee trees are pruned short to conserve their energy and aid in harvesting, but they can grow as much as 30 feet tall. Each tree is covered with green, waxy leaves, growing opposite each other in pairs, and the coffee cherries grow along the branches. Because it grows in a continuous cycle, it's not unusual to see flowers, green fruit, and ripe fruit simultaneously on a single tree. Studies show that drinking coffee reduces the risk of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, heart disease, diabetes type 2, cirrhosis of the livers, and gout. So not only is coffee a fruit, but it's a good fruit for you. So next time you sit down to have a cup of coffee, just remember you're having a cup of fruit juice. Studies show that men who drink 6 or more cups of coffee daily reduce the risk of developing prostate cancer by up to 20%. Who only drinks 6 cups of coffee a day? I don't know, but I guess if you go by the size of the cup, maybe. Coffee contains antioxidants, which help prevent free radicals from damaging cells. One study found that a typical serving of coffee contains more antioxidants than a serving of grape juice, blueberries, raspberries, or oranges. Remember what I said about fruit juice? The most expensive coffee in the world is from Indonesia. It's called Kopi Luwak, or civet coffee. It's made from coffee beans that have been eaten, partially digested, and then excreted by a weasel-like animal called the Asian palm civet. These beans sell for more than $600 a pound, or $50 a cup. It is also the world's worst coffee. It tastes a lot like weasel poo. It is said to be good to the last dropping. In the United States, September 29th is celebrated as National Coffee Day. And personally, I think there should be a federal holiday. But probably not. On the dashboard of the Mercedes, there's a small coffee cup. It gets bigger as you drive, telling you it's time to stop and get a cup after driving too long. Leave it to the Germans to come up with that one. The cappuccino was named because it resembled the peak on the Capuchin monk's cloak. It was also the same color as their clothing. You know you're drinking too much coffee if your t-shirt says, "Decaffeinated coffee is the devil's blend." You can type 60 words a minute with your feet. You can jump start your car without cables. You've worn out the handle on your favorite mug. You go to AA meetings just for the free coffee. You forget to unwrap candy bars before eating them. Charles Manson thinks you need to calm down. And every shirt or blouse you own has coffee stains on it. Guilty as charged, every item of clothing I own has coffee stains. Today, coffee is second most traded product on the world market, second only to oil. And then coffee in Laredo. Way back in 2002, we had Espumas. It's a nice little coffee shop on Guadalupe Street. They had good coffee, sandwiches, good conversation, plenty of old photographs in and around Laredo hanging on the walls. You could wander around. It was almost like being in a museum. I like to hang out there on occasion. Took my wife there for lunch on numerous times. Today, there's a giant bridge going over the Tex-Mex Railroad yard where the Espumas used to be. January 1st, 2011. Scholar's Coffee Shop opened just off of Delmar Boulevard. Their saying was wisdom in a cup. I liked hanging out at Scholar's. They had books on the walls. It was kind of like drinking coffee in the library. We would go by and talk for hours with the owner, Guajardo, and his wife, Carmen. And she made pizza bagels. Or would it be a bagel pizza? It was a pizza made on a bagel. They were so good that you almost couldn't swallow them because your tongue wouldn't let go. Your tongue was constantly yelling at your throat, "This is mine, you can't have it." Great food, great conversation. You remember that Mayan prophecy? December 12th was going to be the end of the world. We stopped by December 2012, have a cup of coffee, and the door was closed. The Mayans were right. The end of the world had arrived. Scholar's coffee ship was no more. Don't know what happened and don't know where the owners went. They were great couple, and they made really good coffee. And unfortunately, they're no longer with us. However, today we do have the Organic Man Coffee Shop. 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. You may have heard that earlier. Remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. We'll be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. Some of the best coffee in the world. Not a coffee drinker? They also have hot tea, hot chocolate, and other beverages. Sometimes they have pastries. Stop on by, say hello to Julio and his wife Marta, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. Plenty of parking at this location, so you don't have to worry about driving around the block looking for some place to stash your car. Life is too short to drink bad coffee.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arkanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arkanasa Radio.
You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed those messages. Most people usually drink coffee when they're sleep deprived. Well, that much needed jolt not only keeps you awake, it makes you sharper. A CNN report that coffee allows your brain to work in a much more efficient and smarter way. The Time reporter Michael Lemonick says, when you're sleep deprived and you take caffeine, pretty much anything you measure will improve. Reaction time, vigilance, attention, logical reasoning, most of the complex functions you associate with intellect. It's not surprising that back in the old times there were so many coffee houses where the government suddenly got a little concerned that people were thinking too much. It is far easier to keep people under control when they're semi-intoxicated or thoroughly intoxicated. People go to bars, they drink too much beer, they get in fist fights, they yell and they scream. They go home, if they make it home without crashing their car. Not a whole lot of thought going on there. However, you go to the coffee shop, you consume vast quantities of black hot coffee. Your brain goes into overdrive. You start thinking. You suddenly come up with solutions for various problems in life. A lot of the great writers used to hang out in coffee shops. A lot of the artists as well. They would start the day out drinking 2 or 3 pots of coffee. Then they would create their great works. And once they had accomplished what they'd set out, then they would stumble off to the local bar where they would slowly medicate themselves into unconsciousness. But that was then. Still more about drinking too much coffee. You built a miniature city out of the little plastic stirrers. People get dizzy just watching you. You've worn the finish off your coffee table. Starbucks owns the mortgage on your house. You're so wired you pick up AM radio and people test their batteries in your ears. Your life's goal is to amount to a hill of beans. If you dig deep enough, you can find a doctor somewhere that will tell you that coffee is not good for you. They'll tell you all kinds of adverse health problems. Everything from it'll stunt your growth, which is weird since I started drinking coffee when I was 8, and I'm almost 6 feet tall today. It will also cause your heart to beat erratically, but so far they haven't been able to prove that one either. But there are doctors out there that will try to convince the planet that there is something evil to be found in a cup of coffee. The most shocking revelation of a report that I read is something called iatrogenic damage, which is defined as a state of ill health or adverse effects resulting from medical treatment. Now, what does this have to do with drinking coffee? It is the third leading cause of death in the United States after heart disease and cancer. So that doctor who's trying to convince you not to drink coffee, you might want to keep an eye on him, because he is amongst the medical profession that is the third leading cause of death in the United States. And so far, they haven't been able to figure out how much coffee it is that you need to consume to be bad for you. But I keep hearing this from people. You drink too much coffee. You shouldn't drink that much coffee. It's bad for you. I disagree. Coffee is very good for you. It wakes you up and makes you think well. Gives your mouth something to enjoy. Whenever I order a cup of coffee and they ask me what I take in it, I always tell them I like coffee in my coffee. I appreciate the taste of the coffee. I don't need to add any chemicals or additives to make it taste like something other than coffee. So I like coffee with my coffee. Try it sometime. You might be surprised how good it tastes. That's it on our coffee show. Not much more can be said about the wonderful black goodness coming in a cup. Next week, we will be talking about shadow people. And hopefully, we will be having call-ins. Of course, it will only be between 5 and 6 o'clock on Saturday that you can call. So if you're listening to the show as a recording, don't bother calling in. There won't be anybody here to answer. I have done that myself. You're sitting there listening to a podcast and you're really amazed by something that was said, or you hear them say something and you're not quite too sure if you heard what you think you heard, so you grab the phone and you start dialing that number, and usually about halfway through it you realize, oh, this is a recording and nobody's going to answer my phone call. So, next week when we're on the air, we will try taking phone calls. We'll be talking about shadow people. If you've had a shadow person occurrence in your life, if you've seen one, if you believe you've seen one, if you aren't too sure what a shadow person is, you can call. Hopefully, I will answer the phone. The number you'll want to call, 956-242-0484. I'll repeat that. 956-242-0484. And of course, the rules and regulations apply to anyone calling. And no swearing, no saying bad things about people. Simply try to talk about what it is we're talking about. What are shadow people? Nobody's quite too certain. But we've all seen them, whether we acknowledge the fact or not. You're sitting there in a vehicle, or you're standing somewhere, and you see somebody come up alongside you, and they're just in the periphery of your vision. And you know this person is standing there. And when you turn your head to see them, they've vanished. There's no one near. Those are the shadow people. Tune in next week, Saturday, between 5 and 6, and we'll be discussing shadow people on Strange Things with Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?